The implications of October 7, 2023 are still being felt around the world. And with me here today to understand further those revelations coming out of that horrific day is a friend and author, Barbara Kay.
A clear path forward requires looking back and learning. Good public policy requires human connection. It's a consideration of the facts, applying common sense and innovation. It's urban, it's rural, it's real life. We all have something to contribute. We all have a responsibility to get informed because there's a little piece of Canada in all of us, isn't there? Let's learn on this path together. This is Leaders on the Frontier.
Barbara writes extensively. She's an author, and you can find her in the Epoch Times as well as the National Post and so many other publications. So a warm welcome to you, Barbara, for joining us today.
Thanks, David. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And I know this is a difficult topic when we reflect on the horrible violence that's being felt now by both the people of Israeli, Palestinians, and so many others in the Middle East. But I really do appreciate you coming on to help us better understand not only October 7, but what I would refer to as revelations, kind of a domino effect coming out of October 7 that really help shed a light on very important issues that we as Canadians face and the world faces. So I want to begin with a fairly basic question, and that is, help us understand what Hamas is.
Well, Hamas is designated as a terrorist group in Canada and the United States and many other Western nations. Hamas is a group that was born of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's an Islamist. It's an Islamist group that is part of a general Islamist revival that is springing up in various places around the world. They are all loosely tied together in terms of their triumphalist, supremacist message. So you have Al Qaeda, you had Islamic State, you have the Houthis, that the Houthis group. Sorry, I forget their Arab name, and the Taliban. So they all have Hezbollah, of course. They all have somewhat different focuses. Some are more violent than others. Some are more, but they all have in common that they are a theocratic and Islamist supremacist group. So Hamas was formed in the 1980s by the Muslim Brotherhood, and it has since then, it was a fledgling group, and since then it became powerful, and it established itself in Gaza as a resistance movement. It began actually as a kind of, just as Hezbollah has a sort of humanitarian arm, a social service arm, but it's essentially a guerrilla group with supremacist leanings and virulently anti-Semitic. All of the Islamist groups are anti-Semitic to one degree or another. Hamas is, I would say, rabidly so. And that
It's
is,
really,
yeah.
for me, I find it hard to kind of wrap my head around this, but there's certainly a long history. And if I think of conversations I've had with, eminent experts such as Dr. Philip Saltzman, a cultural anthropologist, he'd certainly underline a number of points that you made, is that this is in many ways a religious war, that Hamas sees its mission to undertake genocide against the Jews, to drive them into the sea, so to speak. So that would be in keeping with your understanding as well. Is that right, Barbara?
Well, I mean, they've made no secret of their ambitions. Their 1988 charter, the very second paragraph is Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it
Wow.
obliterated others before it. So when they say Israel, they mean Jews. They do not want a Jewish state in their presence because they do not believe that Islam permits Jews to live amongst Muslims unless they are, of course, in a position of dimitude, or as they used to be hundreds of years ago. But they will not live in equality with Jews in any political sense. That's anathema to them. So their 1988 charter, it's very straightforward, and it is a manifesto
Hmm.
that says we will eradicate the Jews. But it's sort of interesting when they made common cause with the left, a lot of leftists weren't too comfortable with the anti Semitic language. So, interestingly, in 2017, they changed their charter. It reads completely differently. In
Oh,
2017, they took away all the, we're going to kill all the Jews, and it became Zionism is evil. Not, before it was the Jews are evil. Now it's Zionism is evil. It's a racist undertaking.
mhm.
It's a colonialist undertaking. They started using all the buzzwords that appeal to the left.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so,
I wasn't aware of that
yeah,
change in
yeah,
2017. Wow.
yeah.
So
So,
in
so,
that context, I think, Barbara, one of the things I find hard to understand is how Hamas has systematically, as a military strategy, as a tactic, used their own civilians as a shield to any
mhm.
kind of military attack against them as an organization. So they do this in particular ways. And one of them is that I think it was a surprise to people that they were locating military operations beneath hospitals, of all things. Is that actually true?
Oh, yes, it's completely true. And if you follow on a daily basis the IDF reports, there are channels, there are numerous IDF people that are guiding you through the events of the day. They show you, they have
Oh,
footage.
The Israeli army, the IDF.
Yes, and observers of also there's Israeli TV stations, but they're using footage that shows you here we are, we're outside this hospital. Now we're going to take you inside the hospital. As you see over here, we have discovered a tunnel underneath. Here's what we discovered in the tunnel, and they show you all the armaments, and they show.
Wow.
But it's not just in it's not just in the hospitals. It's in schools. It's in mosques. It's in private residences. They have gone into private residences and they have uh, inside a child's room, they have stuffed armaments and all kinds of stuff. I mean, the families are very aware of this is how they live, and they do not consider this abnormal at all. You
Hmm.
talk about human shields, the use of people to cover for the activities and to prevent or to try to get people that have different values like we
Hmm.
have. We value human life. They have said we don't value life, we value death. Death in the name of Islam is martyrdom. You go directly to paradise. This is what people in this culture are raised in. They're raised to believe that to die as a martyr, as a human shield, as that this is for the further glorification of Islam and its ends.
Wow.
We're dealing with a culture that is so radically different from in its values and principles that it's very difficult for people to actually give credence to the words of the leaders themselves, who say very outright, every baby that dies is good for us. Every child that die. I mean, they are very out there in terms of presenting these tactics, and since we can't believe that people could be so
Hmm.
monstrous, we say, "Oh no, no, that's just rhetoric. They don't
Yeah.
really mean that. They love their children as much as we do, and um, when they're grieving just as much. They may be grieving when the children actually die, but
Hmm.
in their own words, they will say when they groom these children to be suicide bombers.
Hmm.
You may have seen footage from groups like Memory or the Palestinian Media Watch. They show you children in 5 years old. What do you
Hmm.
want to be when you grow up?
Hmm.
I want to kill Jews, and I want to die for Allah. I want to die for Islam,
Wow.
killing, but I want to kill Jews doing it. they are indoctrinated from earliest childhood into this cult.
I tell you, Barbara, it's really bizarre, but the clip that we just showed, courtesy of the Israeli Foreign Affairs, the paradox is that the clips of those horrific murders were really, by and large, taken by
Mm-hmm.
Hamas soldiers or terrorists
Mm-hmm.
who were taking them and documenting them, and then in turn posting them on social media because they wanted to show their delight in the violence and the murdering that they were undertaking. I mean, this is
Yeah,
the
they
paradox.
have no guilt and they have no. This is not something that they consider shameful. They
Yeah,
consider this something to be proud of. We saw one clip. I'm sure you've seen it, of a man calling his parents uh, on uh, WhatsApp,
yes,
or he's calling them
yeah,
and say, go to my WhatsApp. You'll see I
wow,
killed 10 Jews. Mother, I killed, 10 Jews. Put father on the line. So
yeah,
and the parents were like, oh, yes, that's fine. That's fine. But it's time to come home now. It's time to come home.
yeah,
By the way, these were not just Hamas fighters that went into Israel. They were accompanied by many, I think maybe a couple of hundred of civilians who came for, like, as if it was like a joyride, and they participated. They participated. Uh, it runs like a streak of um, a kind of passion that runs through the entire culture. Very difficult for us to
okay,
appreciate. We can't even fathom it. Our imaginations find it very difficult to grasp.
yeah. So I think many Canadians would assume that there's a vision of coexistence, of living, peacefully. That there may be um, vehement arguments and debates and conflict, if you will, between, say, the state of Israel and the Palestinian Authority. But there would still be a vision of coexisting, of peace. But that assumption is not correct. That's not what the assumption is on Hamas's part. To be clear,
No, there is
they see the
it's a
mission.
ridiculous assumption. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
an absurd assumption to make, and it's never going to happen with Hamas. That is 100%. With the
Okay.
Palestinian Authority, there was a possibility. It's a very corrupt and very weak. And if you look at the polls are far more supportive of Hamas than they are of the Palestinian Authority, of
Okay.
Fatah. So there's no question that Fatah has not got the trust of the people. They are not capable of going in to govern Gaza. How Gaza is going to be governed when this is over, I honestly think it's a little premature to even be talking about it. And I think also something that I should add when I talk about Hamas and this culture, I'm not talking about all Islamic cultures.
Hmm.
There are stable states in the region. I mean, Saudi Arabia is not a democracy, it is a theocracy. However, the political leaders understand that stability is far more important than allowing gangs like Hamas and
Hmm.
the Houthi rebels. Saudi Arabia has spent a lot of time, effort, and firepower trying to subdue the Houthi rebels, who they consider an enemy. Um, so, so just the fact that states are as Islamic doesn't mean they can't get along with Israel if they have the maturity,
Hmm.
and if they can get past this idea that there is something um, that living side by side with a Jewish state is something too horrible to contemplate. I
Mhm.
mean, for certain groups, it just really is too horrible to contemplate. But look, we've got United Arab Emirates, and you've got Saudi Arabia.
Mhm.
These countries are ready to acknowledge the political reality and to say, okay, look,
Mhm.
if this has gone on long enough,
Well,
they have no.
and look at indeed the long relationships now between Israel and Egypt.
Yes, it's been a cold peace, but it's been a peace. And Jordan, also not a warm peace, but peace nonetheless, and cooperation, great deal of
Mhm.
cooperation. It can happen, but the Palestinians are a special case. They just have not been able to get past or absorb the idea that it is conceivable that the Jews have a right to their own state,
Mhm.
that it is a sovereign state, it is a legitimate state, and they can't get past the idea that no, it is not fit. It's not fitting for any Muslims to have to live beside a Jewish state. It's not going to happen. And
Yeah.
if you don't give up on that negative dream, it isn't going to happen. So I think we can't predict what's going to happen after this is over.
So it seems like a long time ago now. October 7 occurred, and it was a very, very dark day. And then immediately, of course, Israel pledged itself to going after Hamas to basically take them out. You had Now you've had well over 100 days of military action. You've had different pauses, if you will, as they've tried to negotiate the release of different hostages. I think there's still a couple dozen left. In fact, there's a kind of a gruesome thing now where Hamas is playing a kind of almost like a game where they show the pictures of these hostages and show those that have been killed and those that are in question. I mean, it's really quite morbid. But we
Mhm.
saw a whole cascade of revelations come out of October 7, one of which was demonstrations around the world in different countries, including Canada. And we saw demonstrations in favor of Israelis, the Israelis, Israel's response. But we also saw demonstrations that were in favor of Palestine, and even edges of demonstrations that were seemed to be in favor of Hamas. So what struck you about those demonstrations in Canada after
Well,
October 7, Barbara?
two things struck me. One was the rapidity with which these protests sprang up. I mean, before Israel had even started to retaliate,
Mhm.
everybody knew that they would, but the bodies were still warm, from the massacre. And already you had people organizing, and it was like a call to arms across the world. And suddenly we saw these highly organized demonstrations uh, that were just suddenly everywhere. And I think you're charitable when you say that they were uh, pro Palestinian. To me, they were pro Hamas. When
Pro
you
Hamas. Okay.
I would say so, because when the words "from the river to the sea" are part
Hmm.
of the Hamas charter. That's in their original charter,
Hmm.
and the words mean eradication of Israel.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you're holding a sign that says "from the river to the sea," you know, or you ought to know. I know there's a lot of ignorant people that just think,
Hmm.
"Oh no, we're just, we're protesting for a ceasefire," but the people that organize these protests are not. The people that organize them, Sami Doon and all these all this whole network of pro-Palestinian organizations that are kind of run at the top by and funded by Qatar and you know,
Mhm.
Muslim Brotherhood is organizing. This is an incredibly nobody understands how globally organized the Islamist revival is.
Okay.
Um, it's
But
under
that in itself, Barbara, that surely that's a revelation that you're right that the timeliness of these demonstrations was immediate and it was
immediate,
highly organized.
organized, organized. All the signs, for example, all of a sudden there were all these professional signs available.
Mhm,
These are not spontaneous. Um, Gee, this doesn't seem right to me. Let's go out and protest.
mhm.
I just saw a clip on Twitter, sorry, X. I just saw a clip of a young man holding, it was in London, holding a sign, something asking for a second intifada, a socialist intifada. So somebody comes along and interviews him and says, well, what does that actually mean, a socialist intifada? And the young man says, well, if I'm being honest, he said, I just went over there to where they're organizing, and somebody handed me this sign. I don't even know what the word intifada means. So I think there's quite a lot of that
And what
going
is
around.
that intifada, to be clear?
Intifada means uprising. It means violent uprising. So it's a kind of call to arms, a
Mhm.
revolutionary call to arms.
Exactly.
But it definitely has the sense of violence. And
Mhm.
uh, so when people call for that, I think a lot of people really don't understand what they're calling for, and so they're actually calling for more violence when they call for intifada.
Yeah. So it's quite disturbing because but the organizers are clearly advocating intifada, armed
Yeah.
revolution,
Hmm.
and in many cases genocide against Jews.
Hmm.
And against Israel. So this is very disturbing. And in Canada, we had many demonstrations, large scale, and we even had bizarre incidences between police and the serving of double doubles from Tim Hortons and donuts at by Avenue Road there, a very prominent area of a Jewish community where you had protesters blocking roadways illegally and very much in the face of the Jewish community right there. And of course, we value protest in Canada, but there's places to protest it, like by Parliament Hill, for instance, or um, by a legislature or by a city hall. But that's not what was happening. And then you had the police show up with coffee and donuts as almost like a bizarre public relations gesture. And I know that the Toronto police chief did give kind of an apology of sorts. But what crossed your mind when you saw that, Barbara?
Well, I this is a tactic. It was a PR kind of stunt because it's a strategy. Police forces around the world are struggling with what to do about protests that are not like the old style protests, where people protested, but they responded to police directives.
Hmm.
They're now dealing with protests by people have no fear of police, have no respect for police, do not care, and they will get very aggressive.
Hmm.
So we've seen a lot of that in Europe, where they've called out. I mean, they've had you know people, police on horsebacks, they're wearing full SWAT team armor and everything, and they've actually, in some cases, been so surrounded by hostile people that they've actually retreated, and in some cases, they've even barricaded themselves when they haven't felt that they have enough police to deal with it. So there, around the world, you have police. Well, how? What do we do with these people? Aggression maybe isn't the best. So they're now trying techniques like establishing a kind of we're all in this together kind of thing, and we're don't think of us as your enemy. We're
Hmm.
actually, you know we want to get along with you, and we'll resolve this together kind of thing. And it's a strategy. Look, I don't blame them for looking for ways to lower the temperature on
Hmm.
the heat, the anger that's out there. But that was just the wrong place to do it. As you said, these people, if they were really if their object was to protest what Israel is doing in Gaza, then they should be in front of the Israeli consulate. They
Hmm.
should not
Right.
be in a Jewish neighborhood harassing and intimidating Jews. That
Hmm.
just shows you that all these protests about no, 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 it's not Jews that we don't like, it's Zionism that we don't like. That fig leaf is completely off. That's now being has been trampled into the muck. Nobody believes it anymore. You'd have to be very naive to believe that this is about Israel or Zionism. This is about Jews. They don't like Jews.
Okay, so that's where, in the great Canadian tradition of healthy debate and spirited discussion and all the rest, in that great democratic tradition, we can have demonstrations. That's a very important
Mhm.
part and right of what it means to be Canadian. But as soon as we start putting on masks, as soon as we start trampsing into people's neighborhoods, then we're getting into a different territory, aren't we?
Yes, playing with fire. Look, I think a lot of the reason that these protests became emboldened is because people took a good look into 2020 at the
Mhm.
BLM protests with Antifa and
Right.
the tremendous amount of intimidation, vandalizing of stores. Uh, the police didn't really do much about it. Burning buildings. In this country, we've seen 85 churches burned
Mhm.
and vandalized.
Yeah.
So
And no charges. No
yeah.
charges.
Okay, so what does that say to somebody who has their own issue? Well, I
Mhm.
don't care about the indigenous people, but hey, I do care about the Palestinians,
Yeah.
and if they can get away with burning 85 churches, maybe I can get away with breaking the windows of a Jewish delicatessen,
Yeah.
or I can
Right.
we can walk down the sidewalk
Mhm.
and scream at people and say whatever we want because
Yeah.
nothing's going to happen. And in
Well,
fact,
and to be clear, Barbara, in Montreal, we did have attacks on synagogues, and we've had
yes.
attacks on people's homes as Jews. So this is very disturbing. This is a
Mhm.
profound revelation.
I think this is, I'm very sorry to say, and I would love to be proven wrong. To me, this was like a volcano that was like the lava was kind of simmering under the
Mm,
surface. And this Hamas thing was taken as a sign around the world by militant Islamists. It's happening. It's the great wake up call. And it's almost like sleeper cells all over the world. This is
mhm.
our time.
Wow.
Uh, the caliphate is coming, whatever. And I think that this tremendous energy has been unleashed. In a recent column, I said it's like a genie got out of the bottle. You can't, that bottle top was never, the cork was not very tightly plugged, anyways. And now that genie's not going back in the bottle. And I think we're going to see, we've seen, as you say, incidents, bullet holes in
Mhm.
a Jewish school door or a synagogue door, uh, churches burned, but not people burned. But that could change. That could
Yes,
change.
indeed.
So I do feel we're sitting on a powder keg here, and around the world as well. We don't know where this is going.
Now, I know that we could talk about this area of immigration policy for quite a while, because I know that there's a lot of implications around immigration in so many Western countries, and Canada is very much in the forefront of this as we accept well over 1 million immigrants into Canada now. It's a record that is never been seen before. So this massive movement of people into Canada has many implications. Not only as people seek to find housing, they're issued medical cards, as we already have multi-year waiting lists for many Canadians to get medical health care. Um, it certainly changes the wages of many working Canadians as more and more people are looking for jobs with that 1 million people entering the country. But it also relates to the theme in the context of our conversation around culture. Culture matters to a family, to a community and to a country. And when it comes to culture, are we, do you think, being naive then that we can just let anybody into our country
Mhm.
and not undermine our culture and our sense of shared democratic values and respect for what it means to be a Canadian, Barbara?
No, you're not. I mean, I think the people doing this are either terminally naive. I think Justin Trudeau, part of his problem is extreme naivete, coupled with a very passionate dedication to leftist dogmas that he
Mm,
were downloaded into him when he was very young, and which he has never stepped away from. He believes in them. His father was quite left in certain ways. Cuba, he was a big fan of Cuba and China. And I think he's imbued with this ideas from the left that are troubling. And I think he also has a kind of romantic vision of Islam uh, that is kind of an interesting flaw in many Westerners who think their own religion is, outdated and boring
mhm,
and,
mhm,
of no value at all. But there's something very magical about these desert people with their flowing robes and their,
mhm,
interesting headgear and their apparent wisdom. And I mean, they know something that we don't. So when you couple that with a leftist kind of fascination with revolution,
mhm,
um, and you deliberately want not to see the dark side of Islamism, and you really do want to believe that Islam is not only a religion of peace, but a religion of, you know, uh, that they have something very special to bring to the table, and all of that. And there's plenty of them, and uh, you know, they vote liberal.
mhm,
So uh, I think that he has deliberately overlooked the cultural elements because he doesn't. He thinks that people can. He thinks that he believes in social engineering. So he thinks that it doesn't matter what people believe in their home countries.
mhm,
The minute they come into Canada, they are diverse, and you just not allowed to say that our culture is better than any other culture. That's
mhm,
part of the multi cultural uh, sort of contract, and it's been a disaster.
mhm.
It's going to be
Well,
more of a
certainly we've heard comments from Immigration Minister Mark Miller now that there's the possibility of welcoming thousands of Palestinians into Canada. And I would say, well, on what basis can you possibly even screen and understand who you're dealing with and inviting into the country, ironically? So I think that just about sums up the train wreck that is Canada's immigration policy now, both in terms of its impact economically on Canadians, undermining people's wages as people seek housing, as they seek medical cards and services. But it really begs the issue whether we really have a handle on our vision of shared values as Canadians, and it begs in my mind whether there should be a moratorium now on immigration. I mean, this is really hitting our country hard.
Yes, for the economic reasons you've cited alone, there should be a moratorium. I don't think any good case has been made that there's value added in just keeping the
Mhm,
annual numbers so high. I don't see that we have such a dearth of, it's not like there's a sign in every window.
mhm,
People needed, please come in. I'll pay you anything. I mean, I think. No argument on the economic can be disputed. I mean, it's not good. But on the cultural level, um, I, I think that it's unbelievable that Trudeau was very quick to say, "Oh, we'll take Gazan refugees,"
mhm,
because that's who we are as a people, and without even asking himself or his minister or anybody of his advisors. Isn't it odd that there's no Arab countries that will take them? They're
Mhm.
ethnic brothers. Most Gazans, many Gazans, are ethnically Egyptian. There's no difference. Egypt doesn't want them. Egypt
Mhm.
kind of was responsible for creating them because they sponsored the Fedayeen in the 1950s, and it was out of the Fedayeen who were raiders. They would go in and make raids in Israel and everything. They were the precursors to Hamas, and they eventually saw that they'd helped to create a monster. They want no part of them. They don't even want them in the Sinai Desert. They won't even put in refugee camps in
Wow.
the Sinai Desert. They want nothing to do with them.
Mhm.
Every country that took them in after 1948, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, uh, um, Tunisia, all of them found that they were a thorn in the side of their countries. All of them wanted to get rid of them. And
Yeah.
now Canada is going to be, but when they come to Canada, they're just going to be perfect, perfect Canadians
Yeah.
because that's what happens.
So it truly is naive at best. Um, Another revelation I think that came out of October 7, Barbara, was universities right across the Western world, including in Canada and, of course, the United States. There are many cases, I think, in Canada where we had, again, student groups, demonstrations, faculty weighing in vehemently in support of Hamas. In fact, we even had a particular case at a sexual assault center. I believe it was in at the University of Alberta. Pardon me, where the director issued statements in support of Hamas. I understand, and that person was later let go. But I would say if you were a Jewish student at the University of Alberta, you must have been
Hmm.
horrified to come across people, and this is certainly right across Canada. You had various universities weigh in, and really, I think we're quite reckless when it came to this need to take positions in favor of Hamas. It's spellbinding. What did you observe?
I observed what you observed, that there was a tremendous tone of glee at what Hamas had accomplished, and
Mhm.
and and a lot of academics who just couldn't contain. They had to put it out on X, and they had to be out there
Mhm.
saying that this was an act of resistance whose time had come, and by any means necessary, and who absolutely, of course, the feminists did not want to know about all the horrible rapes, the gang
Yeah.
rapes, and no, they didn't want to know because uh, I mean, it was Hamas. So, and it was resistance. And so it was, that was extremely cruel. That was quite a blow to women who, there were academics out there saying, well, we don't know for sure. Um, you know, like they wanted to wait and see. It's very interesting. The whole Me Too movement was based
Mhm.
in believe her,
Yes.
except of course if it's the victims of Hamas. So
Wow.
the hypocrisy, the kind of willingness to draw no lines whatsoever in terms of atrocities, and to keep claiming that it's resistance,
Mhm.
and to keep saying, well, you have to understand the context.
Yeah.
What particularly disgusts me is the double standards, because anytime somebody makes a statement about Muslims being, well, I'm afraid of Muslims because they're, look at all the terrorism in the world.
Mhm.
And most of it is Islamic, and virtually all of it is Islamist.
Mhm.
Then you'll be called a terrible Islam. Nobody will say, "Well, yes, I understand in the context how you could feel that way." They just say, "You're an Islamophobe.
Mhm.
You're a terrible person. You're a horrible person." And you'll have Justin Trudeau agreeing and saying, "Oh, that's not who we are as Canadians." So
Mhm.
you cannot apply. You cannot. apply to an individual Muslim. Um, you can't discuss Muslims in general in the context of Islamism that's going on all over the world, but any Jew is a fair target because of Zionism. And
Mhm.
many, they don't ask whether you're a Zionist or not. Not all Jews are Zionists. In fact, an unfortunate number of Jews are quite willing to throw Israel under the bus if they feel that will maintain their status within
Mhm.
their leftist circles. So long answer to question,
Yeah.
but
But
sorry.
Barbara, in many ways, it wasn't entirely a surprise for those of us who have certainly been involved or observed universities for years. It wasn't really entirely a surprise to see this kind of reaction as being very anti Israel. And I don't mean that in a simplistic way, but because they see commonly the lens of these issues they use is one of cultural Marxism, where everything is seen through the oppressor versus oppressed view. And Israel, they would say, is always the oppressor,
Yeah.
even when there are terrorists who come in like Hamas and literally butcher and murder 1,400 people and take hostage of some 240 people, and it goes on and on.
You said Marxist, and it reminded me instantly of Lenin's famous short but quite clear precept: who, whom, who is doing what to whom. In other words, if an oppressed group is doing terrible things to those who have been deemed oppressors, then
Mhm.
it's called resistance and it's fine. There's no
Yeah,
boundaries to the
exactly.
violence that can be enacted. If an oppressor group, is rude to somebody at a checkpoint, then that is apartheid and violence.
Mhm.
The double standards are applied according to identity groups and according to
Mhm.
intersectionality. In the Marxist scheme of things, Jews cannot be oppressed ever because they think of Jews as white, even though half the Jews in Israel are brown. Uh, because they are Middle Eastern Jews from Arabic countries or Jews that were always there that never left, and they indistinguishable from Arabs. Um, but we are all white because white is our silo. Like that's
Mhm.
Jews are white, and we're colonialists because we came from Europe, but we didn't come representing countries. We came fleeing the countries, that so they're wrong when they say Israel is colonialist. They're wrong when they say or the Jews are colonialists. They're wrong when they say Israel's an apartheid state. They're wrong when they say um, uh, that Zionism is racism because it's the only country in the Middle East where people from different races and religions get along terrific. They're wrong on everything, but it doesn't matter because they've decided. Like,
Exactly. They've decided that the narrative is that
yeah,
Israel is the oppressor and everything is seen through that simplistic, hate-filled
exactly.
lens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did want to share with our audience, of course, is the now famous clip, if you will, of a congressional committee under Congresswoman Elise Stefanik asking very pointed questions to the presidents of three universities: MIT, University of Pennsylvania, and of course Harvard. And I wanted to share this clip with us.
Madam Chair, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the gentlewoman from New York.
Dr. Kornbluth, at MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
So those would not be according to the MIT's code of conduct or rules?
That would be investigated as harassment if pervasive and severe.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If the
Yes
speech
or no?
becomes, if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment? This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes. And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, at an individual.
It's
severe,
targeted at
pervasive.
Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric. When
And is it
crosses into
anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
So in my mind, that clip powerfully illustrates the kind of lens that we were just talking about, Barbara, where the presidents could not, even if their lives depended on it, they could not condemn the kind of blatant anti-Semitism and calls for genocide on their own campuses. They could not call it out and say, no, this is against our code of conduct at a university. So were you surprised by their stunning display of stupidity?
I'm not sure if I would call it stupidity. They obviously all lawyered up and had the same lawyer who told them to just keep saying the same
Indeed.
nonsense. Yes. I was disgusted that not one of them would simply consult their own conscience, and that not one of them would say, of course, this should not be happening on our campus. I am deeply ashamed of the conduct. Like, they just couldn't say it because that would be an admission. That would be an admission that there are there's a double standard on campus. They had to maintain the myth that context is so important, and I mean, they didn't know what to say. So it wasn't stupidity, but it was a scramble to circle the wagons, so that they were very aware that they didn't want to upset their faculty or their the people whose goodwill that they depend on. Because if they had said this was deeply shameful, they would have come back to their campuses, and the campuses would have probably voted them out and said, you have to quit because you should have defended the right of these protesters to say these things. So they were in a tough place. But that was, if ever there was a time for leadership and to step up to the plate, that was it. But by the way, they weren't the only ones. Uh, Former President Obama said virtually the same thing in an interview.
Exactly. Yeah.
He says, we have to remember there's a history here, and we're all complicit, he said. We are all complicit. I mean, he was hedging. He was also saying, well, look at the context.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it is genocide. You know,
But how do you justify the horrific murder of human life like that? It is just breathtaking.
well, I mean, you don't justify that kind of taking of human life. There are such thing as just wars and collateral damage. There's all
Hmm.
kinds of justifications for deaths that are unavoidable, or you
Hmm.
know. But what this pogrom of October 7th met every single criterion for the word genocidal. The fact that they only killed 1,400 people,
Hmm.
or 1,200, whatever the final number was. The intention was to keep on killing if they hadn't been stopped. And it was very unfortunate that the response by the military was so long in coming. That's tragic in itself. But their intention was genocidal. I would call it a proto-genocide because it was a miniature genocide. It was like in Rwanda, uh, when the Hutus just with the machetes, like in one day, if you have the will, even in a very non-technological way, you can kill a lot of people if the passion is there and the will, and you have in your head the idea that the people you're killing are not real human beings, that they're a
Indeed.
form of, yeah, that was in their head. That's their similarity with the Nazis, that they
Hmm.
believed they were killing subhuman beings. The difference, of course, is that they boasted about it, and the Nazis kind of kept their concentration camps like off screen. Uh,
Exactly. Another revelation out of the revelation about universities post October 7, I think, was the whole. Um, I think this is for some donors and supporters of these universities, including in Canada.
yeah,
I don't know if they were naive or what was going on, but I think of the case of Bill Ackman. He's a well known, successful financier, a multi billionaire who has been a very generous supporter of Harvard University and has organized a campaign. And I think by and large was successful in some measure in actually having the president of Harvard resign then. Um, but do you think that has been quite a wake up call to donors that give generously to universities, that you better scratch the surface and understand how this radical ideology of diversity, equity, and inclusion has really now infected universities? And why would you support them with your hard earned money? Why would you
well, I
do
think
that?
yes,
And your
I
board of
think Bill
directors?
Ackman. Yes, I think Bill Ackman is representative of a class of donors, these super wealthy donors who got mugged by reality. And it really, because, I mean, he's Jewish, and I would say most of the donors that have been the quickest and the most, um, uh, how should I say, have been the most intense and agitated by what happened, have also been Jewish. And they are, by the way, disproportionate. Jews are disproportionate donors to universities,
Yes.
and other cultural institutions. But he was an interesting case, as you say. Here's a guy who was obviously brilliant, who's obviously very tuned in. And he admitted himself in one of his long posts, I've read most of them, he conceded quite um, happily that, look, I had no idea about all this stuff. I did not know about that equity meant, or that diversity meant some groups were oppressed. And he didn't know the whole
Hmm.
Marxist underpinning. But that's because when you get to be in that league where you're giving 5 million, 10 million, whatever to a university, you
Mhm.
don't see what's on campus. You don't see what they're teaching. What you see is, a friendly face ushering you into dinner at the
Mhm.
faculty club with the president and people sucking up to you and telling you how great you are and, oh, look what your money's going to. We're going to put this beautiful new chemistry lab and we're going to, your name's going to be on it. All, here's
Yeah.
this beautiful plaque. So it's very beguiling, very beguiling. And I know some big givers in Toronto. There's something very alluring about,
Mhm.
and this hospital wing was donated due to the
Yeah.
generosity in giant, giant,
Mhm.
giant letters. So they're not truly very interested
Right.
in what's going on at the grassroots level. They
Yeah.
they are happy to see, oh, look, our researchers have accomplished this, and we've done that, and we've saved this many lives, and so that's exciting. That's exciting. You're taking part in these phenomenal achievements and your name's on it. So that's the problem is the donors are
Mhm.
um, they're kept away from the
Well,
underside
I
of what
agree with you, and let's hope that, I mean, universities are not going to tell you as a donor
of course
that they vehemently hate what you stand for, because there are, not all, but generally hardcore socialists at universities, and many of them, too many of them, I know this sounds surprising, are largely Marxists. I mean, that's how they self-describe themselves in faculties. There's not an intellectual diversity, and they
that's
certainly
right.
do not advocate for open markets in that grand democratic tradition. They are totalitarians by and large, and this is
Well,
why they came out in
They're
favor of
Marxists who
Hamas.
Yeah, but they're Marxists who get along very, very well nowadays with corporation heads, and because the
Yeah,
corporations are very, very happy to put in the DEI programs and to they're sucking up to each other. So uh, they like to be thought of as good citizens, the
hmm,
corporations, and they love the idea of social justice. Social justice sounds so good, doesn't it?
yeah. It sounds
Um,
great. Wow.
oh yeah, so. Uh, they're very happy to go along with all of the rhetoric and the diversity, equity, blah blah blah, the BLM.
Hmm.
They're happy to fund all that stuff, as long as because they're cowards.
Yeah.
They want to.
Well,
They just want to make money,
okay. For post October 7, let us hope that our eyes are open, that we understand where universities are at in this country, and understand that they're not about intellectual diversity. They're by and large, socialist, hard leftists, as
They
they
are.
self-describe themselves. And I would challenge anyone who donates to a university now to open their eyes and say, why am I doing this? And am I doing more harm than good?
Well, it'll be
So,
a lot easier from now on to get to donors and to say, look at this guy, Bill Ackman. You think he wasn't happy to be a donor? Well, listen to what he has to say. But I mean, I've been saying for 20 years, if only the donors would wake up, money talks, universities understand,
yeah,
they don't understand people on campus, Jewish students saying, it's not fair, it's not fair. They understand when a huge donor like Bill Ackman says, you're not getting my money anymore.
right,
That's what
exactly,
and they also understand two things they understand. They understand money walking away, and they understand lawsuits in which
exactly.
they have to pay out huge damages. And right now, in Canada, there's 6 lawsuits waiting to go forward to get certified that some of the biggest universities in Canada, it'll be class action suits by Jewish students claiming they've been, discriminated against,
And they
intimidated,
have
harassed.
been.
If they have to pay, if they win and they get big payouts, you will see the culture on campus change. That's the two
Well,
things, and both have to do with money.
Well, let's pray that you're right, because I will tell you there's another layer of this which we don't have fully time for. But I will tell you one example. We have medical schools in this country now that, through their admissions process, are systematically
Hmm.
looking at your political opinions
Hmm.
and whether you support diversity, equity, inclusion, and whether they admit you to things like medical school. Now, is that a medical school, or is that all about indoctrination? When you
Well,
start,
it is all about indoctrination, sure, and it's a disgrace that medical students who just want to heal people, they just want to go into
Yeah,
the helping
indeed.
profession,
Yeah,
are made to this whole idea of compelled speech is a disgrace in any case. We've seen it in the legal profession
right.
with the Law Association of
Yeah.
Ontario when
Well, well, look
they
at
made
Jordan
all the
Peterson,
lawyers.
Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Okay, so he's a psychology professor, but the Law Association of Ontario and every lawyer has to be a member of that association. They won't provide you with your membership card unless you
Indeed.
sign a diversity, equity, you have to sign. That's compelled speech.
Yeah,
Um, so you're committing yourself to uh, stuff that you don't believe in, and
exactly.
you should not have to. And yes, medical schools. Uh, anyways, we could go on and on about
Okay,
all
but
the
this
institutions.
is this is a very important moment. Is during these times of crisis, you realize who's who in the zoo, and you realize that by golly, the universities, where do they really sit in terms of these basic questions around values? And why would the donors, let alone taxpayers, be funding this stuff? And why would citizens, let alone premiers of provinces or other leaders at the federal government, be supporting special professional bodies that are letting this rot of ideology into their professions and through their systems? So, this is where I think this is perhaps a massive wake up call to this country to say, who are we, and do we stand for democratic values and individual rights and freedoms and the grand traditions of healthy debate and discussion? That's the question I have.
Well, I pray that your intuition that we are at this tipping point is correct. Certainly, I think there is tremendous anger that has been aroused, and these class action suits are the result of it. A few wins there could make a dramatic difference,
Indeed.
and I have to say that is one of the few positive things that I've seen come out of this horror, is that so many people that were sleepwalking through all of this are now vividly aware. I hope it's not too late in our country. I do fear that in certain European countries it is too late. The die is cast. The populations are too uh, the difficult populations or people with difficult ideas. There's too many of them now.
Mhm.
Um, and I
I
don't
agree.
know what the answer is going to be for them. But we're it's not too late for us, and that's a positive thought to walk away with. We could turn this around, but I don't think it's going to happen during the tenure of this prime minister. I think we're going to need a new leader to help make that happen, because as long as the leader we have is here, he's oblivious to to the divisiveness that he has already caused
Mhm.
and that he is encouraging. I don't see any of this really happening on a national scale
Okay.
unless that changes.
Well, I think another related revelation to this whole October 7 crisis, Barbara, has been that foreign affairs matters.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
if we look at the introduction of the Biden administration, we know that this is quite a contrast to the previous administration under Donald Trump. But we know that U.S. foreign policy does matter.
Mhm.
So when the Biden administration uh, made an about face to support Iran, both financially and to lift embargoes, Iran then had the ability, kind of the green light, to be able to support Hamas financially and otherwise to undertake this kind of terrorism action. Is that a fair assessment?
It is fair. I will never understand how Obama got the idea that Iran being the hegemon in the Middle
Hmm.
East was in any way going to be a good thing. But he wanted that joint treaty, and he
Hmm.
pushed it through, knowing that they were after nuclear weapons, that and knowing that their hatred for Israel was paramount in their priorities. And now we have Iran as the axis, the crux of
Yeah.
all these Islamist groups. They're all tied to, some of them are Shia and some of them are Sunni groups that used to never get along, but now they have, this common vision of an
Mhm.
Israel-free Middle East. And by the way, even before Hamas is finished with, I do believe Israel's going to be in a full-fledged war with Hezbollah. And that's why it's so necessary that they obliterate Hamas, because Hezbollah is watching very carefully what they're doing to Hamas. If they backtrack, if they walk away, if
Mhm.
they walk it back and say we can't do it, or we have to listen to public opinion, Hezbollah is saying, "Great,
Mhm.
now we know that they are the weak horse," as Bin Laden
Exactly.
used. So we're just at the beginning, I think, of something much bigger,
Mhm.
and everybody's going to be sucked in.
And speaking of foreign affairs, we also observe. I was astounded by, I don't know what to call it, the double speak, the lack of basic straight talk on behalf of Canada
Yeah.
on the foreign affairs stage. It occurred to me that we're blowing and sucking at the same time. It was just breathtaking, as we can't seem to articulate clearly our country's stance when it comes to these full cases before the international um, court, accusing Israel of genocide.
Mhm.
And in fact, we turn around and we accuse ourselves of genocide over the claim of mass graves, and there's still no evidence of that whatsoever. So I
Yeah.
find this very bizarre. There's a quote here from John Manley that kind of summarizes it up brilliantly. John Manley, of course, was the former deputy prime minister. I believe he served in a number of capacities, including Minister of Foreign Affairs. But Barbara, have you been impressed by Canada's weighing in on October 7?
It's been terrible. He's right from the beginning. Uh, Nothing is done in foreign affairs in this country without Trudeau is not interested in foreign affairs. He knows very little about foreign affairs. He's not interested in educating himself, and for him, foreign affairs is all about impressing his constituency in Canada. One of his biggest constituencies is the Muslim vote, and he is conscious in every word that he says about this issue. He's the only national leader in the democracies, or the ones that count, that has not didn't visit Israel to offer unqualified support, just sympathy. Never mind support for
Mm-hmm.
their aims, but just
Yeah.
sympathy after the pogrom. And he's been very careful with his words, because for example, when he said, "We don't accept the premise of this International Court of Justice claim of genocide." Um, but when he said that, he got hell from, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they're on his tail all the time. Half his cabinet is very angry that he even offered any support to Israel at all. He's walking a tightrope that he created.
Wow.
And now he's talking. He's saying, "Oh, I don't support the premises, but we will accept the conclusion." So if they
Mm-hmm.
conclude it's genocide, so now he's going along with that. This is somebody who, as you say, called Canada a genocidal nation, ongoing genocide, because of some missing and murdered Indigenous women who were mostly killed by people in their own communities, and
Mm-hmm.
and again with the mass graves, the lowered flag, so he has committed us to considering ourselves a genocidal nation on the basis of not a single death of one single child. We have not got the name of a single child
Mm-hmm.
who has been alleged to literally have been killed by in the residential schools, and now he's ready to allow the International Court of Justice, which
Yeah.
is
It's utterly bizarre. So
yeah.
as we kind of come to the end of our remarkable discussion, Barbara, I did want to reflect with you a little bit. You are a Jew. I know this October 7 and everything that's kind of flowed from that event, the revelations, if you will, have been very hard on the community. I know they've been difficult on many different people in a wartime situation. But how has this, from your point of view, impacted the Jewish community in Canada now?
Oh, I would say it has been a very pivotal and existential uh, event that we have still not really processed. I think
Mhm.
many of us are so stunned by the amount of anti Semitism that burst forth as a result of it. Many of us, I think people that were on the left, and a lot of Jews are, as you know, on the left, have
Mhm.
had to, I have not had to reevaluate my political ideas, but a
Mhm.
lot of them have. They've now realized that this dream of, you know, I know Jews that were actually supportive of the BDS movement because they mistakenly
So
believed,
what is the BDS
oh,
movement?
sorry, boycott, divest, and sanctions movement, which is basically a movement that wants to economically cripple Israel to the point of implosion. And
Wow.
so it's in its own way as exterminationist as Hamas, but they want to do it through economic means. And a lot of Jews said, no, 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 this is just a way to criticize Israel, to make Israel be better, to be, to act better and to help bring about a Palestinian state. And other people like me said, no, 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 it isn't. It's pure anti-Semitism. And if
Hmm.
you're part of it, you're enabling it. And they,
Wow.
no, no, really, we're just, we're idealists. Anyways, those people, and there are tons of them, those Jews, they're tortured today. They don't know what to do. They don't know what to do
Wow.
because it's all blown up in their face. Like they were naive, they were stupid, and now they're politically homeless. A lot of them. So we're all reeling in our own way. We don't we don't know what's going to come of this. We're scared. I personally, I mean, I'm functioning very well. I'm not. I don't walk around crying all day, but I do walk around with a sort of feeling of dread in my stomach all the time.
Mhm.
'Cause
Wow.
I don't know what the end game is here. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Mhm. Wow.
So,
Well, I'm
yes,
sorry
I
to
feel
hear that,
I
Barbara.
feel
I know it's very difficult. And, during a time of war, we pray not only for peace, but we want to act for peace within our own country, across all peoples. And surely this is a time, if it is to be of any value, is a wake up call regarding these revelations and also time for action. So, what can we as Canadians do to really, dare I say, renew our country in terms of both our democratic values and healthy debate, but what it means to be a citizen of this country?
well, that's such a big question, David. I feel that, so many Canadians are and I hear from a lot of them, are so frustrated at what has happened to Canada in their lifetime,
Hmm.
and to watch the devalorization of what it means to be Canadian, to look at our armed forces, the
Yes.
shameful, the shameful uh, dereliction of duty at the top, and preoccupation with this ridiculous gender stuff when we are, and we don't have any submarines and we don't have any. So we have no, we have a, we have not, what are we taking pride in? People want to be proud of their country.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to think of one thing that in the last 5, 6, 7 years that I could say, as a Canadian, I am proud to say that what has Canada done in the last, you know, since 2015 that you could truly say, Canada makes me proud because I can't think of anything.
Mhm.
And I want to, and lots of other Canadians do too. And they deserve leadership that gives them good reason to say it.
Well, I'm very impressed by your way of thinking, Barbara, and your question. What are we proud of to be Canadians today? And let that be a question that will reinvigorate and renew our country as we think about the vision for our country. And I want to thank you then for joining our conversation today, Barbara. And I want to thank you for your wisdom and your courage for speaking up today.
It's been a real pleasure to be with you, David. Thank you so much, and for your sensitivity and you're a great Canadian.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.